We're going to be in Psalm 70 today. Psalm 70. Oh, I knew I was forgetting something. Psalm 70. And we'll read this one together before we get started. After a couple of longer psalms, this is a pretty short one. And so there's really no way I could go too long tonight. Psalm 70, we'll start with the historical note. To the chief musician, a psalm of David to bring to remembrance. Make haste, O God, to deliver me. Make haste to help me, O Lord. Let them be ashamed and confounded that seek after my soul. Let them be turned backward and put to confusion that desire my hurt. Let them be turned back for a reward of their shame that say, Aha, aha. Let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee. And let such as love thy salvation say continually, Let God be magnified. But I am poor and needy. Make haste unto me, O God. Thou art my help and my deliverer. O Lord, make no tarrying. All right. So I've chosen the title, Make Haste, O God. Not all that original, but it seems to be the bookends for the psalm. And so I've chosen it for that reason and for one other. This Psalm of David is almost word for word taken from Psalm 40, beginning with verse 14. So it's almost a copy and paste from verse 14 on in Psalm 40. But there's a few slight differences between those last several verses of Psalm 40, which is quite a bit longer psalm. So this is just the last section of Psalm 40. And there's a few slight differences between those last several verses of Psalm 40 and these in Psalm 70 that are almost duplicates. And the differences are mostly in both the Hebrew and the English translation. So in the writing of Psalm 70, it is actually written a little bit differently. A couple of different words are used to fit the circumstance. And the primary difference is the length of Psalm 40. And the one, that one in Psalm 40, it begins differently than, as we've just read, that cry for a hasty deliverance from God, right? Psalm 40 has quite the prelude before you get to that section in verse 14 that sounds so much like this one. Psalm 40 begins with praise for what God has done in the past, and then it has a profession of what God desires in a person, and then it moves on to this plea for salvation that is familiar to us in Psalm 70. So Psalm 70 it's just the plea. It skips all the other preliminary praise for the past miracles and works of God, and it skips the profession of what God desires in a man, and it just goes straight to the plea for salvation. And it's just the cry for help. It's just the call for God to hurry up and get here and help me with where I am. And this repetition of some of the words in Psalm 40 it's an aspect of the Psalms that reminds us of the versatility of Scripture. A passage that is applicable in one situation may be just as powerfully useful in another situation. And as with most of Hebrew poetry, whereas the language itself tends to rhyme when the voice and the mood are the same grammatically. Hebrew poetry tends more to rhyme in ideas than in sound. And so, as with most of Hebrew poetry, Psalm 70 is the rhyming of the communication of ideas. In other words, you have sets of ideas that are stated in the same way, so you have a rhyming of the communication of the ideas. But very often, as we see in Psalm 1, for instance, you have not just the rhyming of the communication of ideas, but you have a contrast in the ideas themselves. And you can see how that's a powerful way to communicate a contrast, to say things in the same meter and same way, same communication style, but contrast the two different things. And that's a pattern of Hebrew poetry that we've seen. And here we see a contrast between the two ideas presented. Now, here we see that David's prayer contrasts the futility of working against God with the blessings of trusting in God. We see that's the contrast that we're going to notice here, is the futility of working against God, and we're going to see that contrasted with the blessings of trusting in God. And then we begin with the one thing that sets this psalm apart from the similar words found in Psalm 40, and it is the request for haste at the very beginning, and that emphasis in the bookends of this request for haste. So Psalm 70 and verse 1, we'll read it again. Make haste, O God, to deliver me. Make haste to help me, O Lord. This sense of urgency is something with which we pretty easily identify, right? We often feel the need for immediate action by God. And whether we actually have that need, that's really more up to him. Sometimes he decides that it's not as immediate a need as we think it is, right? and that is the case when you're asking anyone for help. Sometimes they have a different perspective, and you feel like your need is immediate, and they see, well, it's going to have to wait, right? and God does that as well sometimes, and his perspective is certainly better than ours or anyone else that might try to or be willing to help us. So our perspective isn't good enough to be sure of such things. But that doesn't mean you should not express your feeling of immediate need, right? We can express our feeling of urgency to God nevertheless. He's not put out by it at all. And we lay at his feet our request for haste. And there's two requests in this first verse, and the first one is that God might hastily deliver. Make haste, O God, to deliver me. The word here translated into deliver in the Hebrew has the implication of snatching away, right? To recover or to pluck out of a situation. And what a great translation in the word deliver, because that when you are asking for God's deliverance, that's very often what you want more than anything, is just to be plucked out of the situation, right? And that is very often our first desire when we're overwhelmed by trouble. We want to be taken out of the trouble, and we want to be in a different situation. So we plea for hasty deliverance. And if there is to be such a deliverance, well, that definitely has to come from God, right? The second plea is for help. And so it is that God might hastily help. You see that in verse 1 again. Make haste, O God, to deliver me. And here's the second one. Make haste to help me, O Lord. Since we have the time, the Hebrew word that's translated "O God" is Elohim, and the Hebrew word that is translated "Lord" with the capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, that is the tetragrammaton. It's the four consonants that make up the name that we typically pronounce Jehovah, having inserted the vowel sounds of Adonai in there, and so make haste to help me, O Lord. He names God with that familiar name that God has given to the people of Israel by which they might call upon him. And when you see the difference in pleas between make haste, O God, to deliver me, and make haste to help me, if you're looking for such things, maybe we see a maturing of the request for deliverance, right? Let me explain. When we may make the plea to be snatched out of a situation, right? And that's maybe our instinctual desire. That's what we want right now. We would run if we could figure out how to get out ourselves. So God, just yank me out of here, right? Put me in a different situation, change everything around me because this isn't working for me, right? And maybe that's what we first desire, and it is what he first says, make haste, O God, to deliver me. But then perhaps we then consider that we're meant to endure the circumstance. Thanks, brother. I appreciate the serenade, but we just need to be snatched out of this situation. I appreciate your help. I don't know what you do with these videos when I do that. We may make the plea to be snatched out of a situation. And then we might consider that perhaps we are meant to endure the circumstance, right? And sometimes you say, God, get me out of here, fix this. And then we think, I wonder if like I'm supposed to be here, right? I wonder if he means for me to glorify him through the circumstance. Nah, no. It seems like maybe between these two pleas, there's just a little bit of at least maturing in the wording of the request. And if we are to endure it, well, we definitely need help, right? And so make haste to help me, O Lord. This word in its Hebrew precedent, and don't worry, I'm not going to do that with every word in the psalm, but speaks of aid. It really means exactly as it is translated. Surprise, surprise. It means to surround and to help in the situation of need. Whatever stage of the plea we find ourselves in, whether it is to be snatched out, to be delivered, or we've come to that understanding that maybe I need to be here. In that case, Lord, I'm going to need your help, right? Whatever stage of plea we find ourselves in, that one in which we cry desperately for extraction or the one in which we request intervention and strength, it is to God we must pray for this deliverance or help. And the next plea in our psalm today is verses 2 and 3, a request for judgment, a request for judgment. Let's read verses 2 and 3. Let them be ashamed and confounded that seek after my soul. Let them be turned backwards and put to confusion that desire my hurt. Let them be turned back for a reward of their shame that say, aha, aha. In both of these verses, we see the focus of God's desired intervention. David, the psalmist, desires God's intervention. And he means for God's focus to move to those who are the psalmist's source of trouble, right? Having asked for his deliverance and asked for his help, he says, I'd like you to focus on these who are troubling me. And he lists 3 different ways in which these who trouble him are doing just that, right? He describes 3 different ways in which they are troubling him. And then he gives the specific ways in which he prays for them to be judged for those 3 different ways in which he is being troubled. First, so we're going to list these. First, we see he prays for judgment. He prays for judgment on those who seek to destroy the righteous. We make the assumption that David here thinks himself to be in a righteous position, as often he does, and worthy of the either the extraction or the help that he's requested. Look at how he describes these who seek to destroy the righteous. He says, let them be ashamed and confounded that seek after my soul. So let's just stop right there for a minute and see that the first characterization of these upon whom he requests judgment is these that seek after my soul. And so I've just summarized that as those who seek to destroy the righteous. They're not seeking after David's soul so that they can take a peek at it and say, oh, yeah, he's pretty cool. No. That's a turn of phrase that specifically means destroy the righteous, right? It means destroy David, destroy his life. To seek after his soul is to intend his destruction. The word soul is translated from nephesh, which answers, it means breath. It answers to the Greek word pneuma, which is translated spirit in the New Testament. Nephesh is translated soul in the Old Testament. These two are the same thing. They both mean breath. The nephesh is the breath of a man. The nephesh is the breath of life in a man. And the psalmist sees the attack of these as an existential crisis. They seek after my soul. Man became a living soul, right? A living nephesh. And this is what they want. They want to see me dead. They want to see me destroyed. And so he sees the attack as existential. It endangers his existence. They want him dead. They want him destroyed. The judgment that he asks for these who seek to destroy the righteous begins with that they may be ashamed. You see that right there at the beginning of verse 2. Let them be ashamed. Grammatically, we'll just take the sentence for this one piece. Let them be ashamed that seek after my soul, right? So on those who seek to destroy the righteous, he prays that they may be ashamed. That's the first judgment that he asks to be poured out on them. The root of this word in the Hebrew, the word that's translated ashamed, is a paling of the face, right? And I just love that because that paling of the face, it brings to mind a situation in which someone has gotten out way over their skis, right? And I was telling a story with the teenagers last night about situations that I'd been in, and I can guarantee you a couple of those situations, there was a paling of the face as I was wandering around neighborhoods that I had no business wandering around in late in the night in Jacksonville, Florida. But the situation here that brings to mind this idea of being ashamed is one in which the one who goes in for the kill, which, to be clear, I wasn't going in for the kill. I was trying to do the opposite of that, but is suddenly faced with a much greater power than he had hoped. And he goes in thinking, I'm taking David out, and then his face blanches. Right? Oh no, right? David wants God to show up in such a way as to pale the face of the destroyer. It's kind of a neat picture. It's what he's asking for. He knows he can't do it, but God can do that. And this next word used, it's actually not much different. There's a reason why I made them 2 points, 2 separate points. And the main reason is that it's a short psalm. And so we're just going to dig down on every aspect of it, right? We have the luxury of doing that. We don't have to rush through it to get done on time. But there is a slight difference between the word that's translated into ashamed and the word that's translated into confounded. They mean very similar, and as it turns out, they do in English also. But there is a similarity. He says, let them be ashamed and confounded. So just grammatically, let's just chop that sentence up. Let them be confounded that seek after my soul. So those that seek to destroy the righteous, he says, not only let them be ashamed, not let them get to a situation in which their face just drains of blood, right? Confounded although the word is different than the former in the Hebrew, as in the English, both mean very much the same thing. That they are close synonyms. While the first implies a paling of the face, this one implies a flushing of the face. And so, in being ashamed, their face blanches, drains of blood, shocked at coming against a defense so strong as God might mount against them, right? And then he prays that they be confounded. And this is used to communicate confusion, confoundedness, and the like. But it's rooted in an embarrassment upon finding that something that is not as it was thought to be. Again, really similar to the other. But all the emotions that a person might go through when they think they're going to destroy the righteous and God steps between them. There's the blanching of the face, the paling of the face, and then there's the embarrassment, the flushing of the face as they realize the trouble into which they've gotten themselves because they've come against God's anointed, as it were. So this is the judgment upon those who come against the child of God, thinking him or her to be undefended. And it's great to know that as a child of God, you are not undefended. And you may call upon God for just this kind of defense or help. The second characterization of these who trouble David is that they want to see him hurt. And so he asks for judgment on those who seek to injure the righteous. Not just destroy the righteous, but injure the righteous. Look at verse 2 again. We're still there. Let them be ashamed and confounded that seek after my soul. And here's the next one. Let them be turned backward and put to confusion that desire my hurt. That desire my hurt. So these are those who seek to injure the righteous. The word translated hurt is often translated evil in the Bible. And they want evil to come upon David. And very often evil means just that. We use the word evil a little bit differently now than it was used in Scripture. Evil means just something bad happening that is seen as bad by the person to whom it is happening, right? So it is being hurt, right? And so hurt is a good translation here, obviously, but sometimes evil is attributed to God in the Bible. And it's obviously not in the way that we use the word evil, right? Because he's not evil in that way. But he does bring hurt upon people, right? And so David says this, that on those who seek to injure the righteous, bring this judgment, and because they desire to injure the righteous. And so it's not enough to want David dead. They want him to suffer. They want calamity to come upon him. The judgment that David asks for them, as you see right there, is that they be reversed. Let's look at that again. He says in verse 2, let them be ashamed and confounded that seek after my soul. Now look at the second clause there. Let them be turned backward and put to confusion that desire my hurt. So there's two judgments here. The first one that he asks for these that desire to injure the righteous is that they be turned backward, that they be reversed. This reminds me of Joseph in his assurances to his brethren who had sought evil against him. And Joseph said to them, essentially, that though they had meant evil against him, God had meant it for good, right? God turned it around so that what they meant for evil inured to Joseph's exaltation and good for everyone involved. And so that's how it is with the kind of help for which we call to the throne of God. People may mean us hurt. But God can take what people mean as hurt and injury, and he can reverse the efforts. And this is certainly, it is judgment for them to see the one that they mean to hurt rise in strength as a result of their trying to inflict the pain, right? And we've seen this before, right? We've seen this again and again, God working to reverse those who seek to injure the righteous. It can also be quite disconcerting for those who are so judged. And this is what David prays for, that they be confused. Let them be ashamed and confounded that seek after my soul. Let them be turned backward and put to confusion that desire my hurt. So let's chop that up and just use just the grammatically take this point. Let them be put to confusion that desire my hurt. Right? That's what that is the statement that is made there. That's the prayer that David is asking. It's the second way he's asking for judgment upon these that are seeking to cause him hurt, that desire his hurt. This term translated put to confusion is more than just an inward confusion. It's not just that they're confused on the inside, that their plot didn't flesh out as hoped. They had hoped not just to destroy, but they had hoped to cause pain and suffering on David. And it isn't just that they are confused on the inside, they're confused in a public place, right? That's kind of the idea. This put to confusion has the idea of being set out for everyone to see. Well, that did not pan out for them, right? And so it's a public confusion. I think maybe we might take a lesson from this, lest we find ourselves on the other side of this equation. Be careful if you think to undermine and injure someone else. And because God very well may be glorified by turning it around, and you may find yourself in the place of confusion, mocked by those who observe your failure to cause the righteous to fall. That's a terrible place to be. The irony is that these had hoped to mock the righteous. And that's the last characterization of these upon whom David asks for judgment. You see that small letter C there. He's asking for judgment upon these who seek to mock the righteous. He says in verse 3, let them be turned back for a reward of their shame that say, aha, aha. Okay, so these are they that say, aha, aha. All right. So no more ahaing. There's obviously a vernacular difference here. We don't typically say that, but it is meant to be a mocking thing. The idea, and you can easily picture it using these words, even though it's not typically maybe how we would say it in English, but you can see someone pointing and laughing and saying that. Aha! See? Look at this, everyone! And that's the idea. And these are those who seek to mock the righteous. They are looking for the opportunity to laugh and to make sure everyone else belittles and mocks the one who is actually righteous. And for these, the judgment for these who hoped to mock the righteous is that they be rewarded for their shameful actions. You see that in that phrasing in the beginning of verse 3. Let them be turned back for a reward of their shame. Okay, the idea here is that they came for a purpose, right? They came. You ever go to the store to pick something up and end up getting something else? That's exactly what's happened here. They came for mocking. They came to inspire everyone else to mock. They are turned back for a reward of their shameful actions. And God has left them they leave with something else that God has given them. It is that they're rewarded for their shameful actions. They did not get what they came for. The picture painted here is of the slumped shoulders and the bowed head of one who thought for an easy victory and foresaw himself or herself exulting in the demise of the righteous. They came with all the vim and vigor of an assured victor, but they're turned back and will endure the reward of their shameful actions. David now can see his way to pray for God's consistent blessing upon the believer as we step into verse 4, in which verse 4 is a request for blessing. That's our third point, is a request for blessing. Let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee, and let such as love thy salvation say continually, let God be magnified. These are two characterizations of the one upon whom David requests blessing. The first characterization of the one upon whom David requests blessing is on those who seek after God. You see that right there in verse 4? He says, let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee. So first, these are men and women who seek God. They're constantly on the adventure, on the quest of knowing him better. And that's what it means to seek God. When we seek after God, we know this, that we're being moved by God to do so, right? We didn't just get born good and have a special gene that made us want to seek after God. No. If we're seeking after God, God is working in us, right? And that's a pretty good thing. And so when we're seeking after God and we avail ourselves of the opportunity that he's given us and the ability that he's given us to seek after him, then we know we are doing the right thing in the right place. We finally have found a cause that we can really go after, right? Because there's plenty of things that you could go after in life and wonder if it really feels right. I don't know if this is right for me. I'm good at it, but I don't know if this is right for me. But when you seek after God and you make your life's passion just getting to know him better, you know you're on the right track because God's the one working in you through this, drawing you to him. And not all upon whom God moves respond as they should. In case you think, well, then I will seek after God if he draws me to do that. And if not, I don't have a choice anyway. As it turns out, that's not reflective of what Scripture says, right? God calls us to him. Jesus promised that if he be lifted up, he would draw all men to him. We know we are drawn to him. So avail yourself of that drawing and respond to it and seek after God. So let's relish the opportunity to seek after him, to know the one who knows you. The specific blessing that is asked for these who seek the Lord is, number one, that they find joy in the Lord. Well, actually, there is only one, so that's all you get is joy. So, so I was thinking there was two. There's not. That they find joy in the Lord. He says, let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee. So let those rejoice and be glad in thee. And by the way, this is unmistakably an increase in joy. That's the result of seeking after God. Because we will be glad in no other but him. We will find joy in no other place, in no lasting joy in any other place but him. If we lack joy in this life, you might even consider this. If you lack joy in this life, it's always because we have not sought to know him enough, right? It's easy to have our joy robbed. And you say, well, don't have a lot of joy. That's because it's easy to have our joy robbed, right? And it's easy to be distracted by all the things for which we might seek. And if you think about it, whenever you're trying to Rack up the reasons for which you lack joy. It's all the things that you've put before him. But if he's at the very first, and he's the burning passion of your life, everything else tends to fall into place. Because when you have a good relationship with him, your responsibilities fall in order. And then you're focusing exactly the way you should be on all things. So seek after God, and then he will give you the blessing of rejoicing and being glad in him. We might, some of the things for which we might seek instead of passionately seeking after him, we might seek for respect and lose our joy because we don't get it. We might long for comfort and riches and lose our joy because we only get so much of it. And there's always somebody that has more comfort or more riches. So that's just a path to misery. We may enter into the endless endeavor to gain what pleasures this world affords, but we'll find no lasting joy in it. All of that must be surrendered, and he must become our pursuit. And so let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee. That's the blessing that David prays for. And then the second group upon which David prays for blessing is on those that love God's salvation. So we see that he prays for blessing on those that seek the Lord. And then he prays for blessing on those that love God's salvation. Also in verse 4. Let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee. And here's the next one. And let such as love thy salvation say continually, let God be magnified. What does it mean to love the salvation of God? Like a person who loves the salvation of God is one who knows something of it by experience, right? I don't think you can love the salvation of God until you've been saved by God, because then you know what it is, right? And so the salvation of God is, just generally speaking, that terminology might be applicable to many different circumstances. It is God's salvation when we're lost and in need of help, and he gives it or he sends it. And we love that when he saves us in that way. It's the salvation of God when you're in a life or death situation and he keeps you alive, right? That's another salvation of God that you got to love that, right? As they say. But we've come to use this term more often to refer to the saving work of Christ on the cross, that word salvation, so that we might be assured of our eternity with him. The name that was given to our Savior is Yeshua, and which is rendered Jesus in the Greek. And that name Yeshua in the Hebrew, Jesus in the Greek, it means salvation. Specifically, it means Yahweh saves, Jehovah saves. The word in our text is Yeshua in the Hebrew. And well, it should be, because salvation is found in no other name, right? And what a blessing it is, and what blessing is asked upon those who love the salvation of God. The blessing is that they magnify the Lord. Now, you might look at that and say, oh, wait a minute. You just gave him a responsibility. That's not a blessing. Well, you've never really focused on magnifying the Lord then. Because there is no greater blessing in life than to know that you have brought glory to him in your life. Let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee. And let such as love thy salvation say continually, let God be magnified. This is essentially the doxology, right? It's the glorification and the magnification of God through the life of a person who loves the salvation of God. If you've been saved, in any measure. But even more so if you've been saved for eternity from the sin that you've committed and its penalty, right? Well, how could you respond in any way then but to magnify him with your life? And what a blessing it is to be granted the privilege of glorifying God with your life. There's nothing higher you could attain in life than to glorify God. The final request of this psalm is a full circle to its opening verse, and it is again a request for haste. Verse 5, but I am poor and needy. Make haste unto me, O God. Thou art my help and my deliverer. O Lord, make no tarrying. There's more confidence in this verse than in the first verse of the psalm, right? But the sense of urgency hasn't changed. And we may mature and grow in our faith. We may understand more about the Lord and more about our problems. But very often it still feels like anything short of an answer now is less than I need. But the reason we feel the urgency for help and deliverance is because we are poor and needy. But I am poor and needy. Make haste unto me, O God. Quit telling yourself how strong you are. Recognize the destitution and need that looks back at you in the mirror. And ask God to step into your emptiness as soon as he will. Because he is our deliverer and our help. But I am poor and needy. Make haste unto me, O God. Thou art my help and my deliverer. O Lord, make no tarrying. So we began asking God to deliver and to help. And we close with the confident proclamation of the one thing we do know. God, thou art my help and my deliverer. I have no other, only you. In conclusion, there are times when we need him to intervene in our lives with haste. And in such times, it is good to know that he waits on the portals of heaven for our call, and he is pleased to respond with haste. And that is Psalm 70.